really Mandirs need to be able to serve all different generations. So Palika, do you mind getting started with answering this question?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think the main challenge that Mandirs face in accommodating various generations, like you mentioned, not just the youth, is I guess the variations in communication and understanding between these generations, and especially coming from, right, these first gen Indians coming from India, having that cultural background, having a basic understanding of Hinduism, being able to refer to that within the mandir, as opposed to second generation people like me, or even third generation, having less of a clear understanding or that cultural basis behind them. And like I mentioned earlier, I come from a very, I'm a minority within the area of Nashville, Tennessee, most definitely. And while we have programs in my mandir like Bal Vihar, which are great for, discussing slohams and discussing stories and the meaning behind them, I think one challenge, especially that I, as a second generation, temple goer, face is the question of why, right? I think especially in American culture, it is very much question the man culture. And that is reflected when you enter the temple space in the fact that, why am I doing this part of the puja? Why is it that we care about this aspect of this procedure, of this function? And so parents, there's two sides of this, right? You have the parents who are, getting incessantly questioned by their children of why, when they just know it as tradition. I think that's often a common, like, oh, why am I circling in a clockwise rotation around or a counterclockwise rotation, during a function? It's often just tradition, right? And then that's accepted. But I think that kind of sideswipes, in a way, the opportunity for greater emotional involvement for different generations when you don't understand why that's going on, especially when it's not the majority around you that follow, the majority in a community. So I think a main focus in communication understanding is bringing the true meaning of functions, whatever generation you're in, having a few moments of explaining the steps of, for instance, a puja, right? So at this moment we are doing, we are bathing Lord Ganesha in, milk, honey, etc. for X, Y, and Z. And I think that itself can be like a great leveling basis for that. For that disconnectivity between like mandirs and accommodation for different generations. I think especially, another challenge that mandirs face is having to deal with the outside of the mandir itself, because there's not that, Hindu majority outside in the United States. You have the challenge of having to deal with and kind of accommodate to, whether it be children, adults who have this othering within the outside of the temple. So I've already mentioned white Christian majority in my area, Nashville, Tennessee. From a young age, I feel like I've had the pressure of having to explain Hinduism when I don't fully understand it myself to those who are interrogating, well, what is Hinduism? Are you polytheistic? What is that dot on your forehead? Is very important.
Bhakti, I would love to hear your thoughts on this question as well.
Yeah, so this whole question of the challenges mandir face in different generations. So in any culture, anywhere in the world you go, even if you have a majority culture, you're going to have a basic challenge of generational gap. What we face is an extra nuance to that. We're not only facing a generational gap, we're facing a cultural gap, a language barrier, a mindset barrier, and because many of the leaders at our temples are people who came to the US in a very different experience, different world, different time, and they worked so hard to build these amazing institutions for us, right? Now, we don't have that same struggle, the same mindset, so it's hard for us to kind of understand a lot of that. And the difficulty goes in both directions. So, and this is commonplace across all temples, and anywhere you go, you will have the elders of the community who say, the youth are not coming. They're not listening. We don't know how to connect to them. Why won't they come? These kids don't think about anything other than their phone these days. We've all heard this. And then on the flip side, you've got all the youth going, oh, the adults don't want to listen to us. They just want to tell us how to do things. This is not how we live. Both are right, both are wrong, right? So it's not one or the other. It's not one versus the other. Each generation is facing very specific challenges that the other generation is having difficulty relating to. So the problem that temples are experiencing is the way up until now, our culture has progressed is different than how it needs to progress going forward. We cannot continue with just these are the traditions. We have to continue with these are the traditions that have worked, but let's reevaluate, readjust, and refocus our energy on how we should really sustain this going forward. So like Bhalika said, why is so important? If you can, the minute a child, a youth, an outsider asks the question of why and you cannot answer it, it does not matter, their interest is gone. And one of the different things is there is a difficulty for different generations to connect simply because of basic mindset. There's no right or wrong here, right? We're just understanding the limitations that we have. In our traditional culture, going back, we were always taught, even in our teachings, you respect the elders and you listen to what they say and you don't question them. But kids growing up here are taught literally the opposite. You question everything. You question authority. You question your traditions. Now, when you have two people with these two mindsets, obviously there's going to be some clash and challenges. So it's not for us to say the other is right or wrong. It's for us to understand when someone asks a question, they're not being disrespectful or rude. That's just how they were raised. And the opposite, if someone is not answering us, maybe they're not pushing us off. Maybe they just don't know, or they just don't understand how to explain it. So the biggest gap is amongst that also language. There are many elders in our community who may not be so comfortable as to speak English in a way that can be easily communicated to the younger generation. So it's so important for us to have multi-levels of resources, right? So how many of us are using audio, visual, digital, virtual resources to complement what we're teaching? It's not to replace the human interaction and the prayers and the speeches of the pundits and all that. It's to enhance that. So for example, I know my temple does this and I've seen others, when there are prayers going on, have it up on a screen, the shlok with the meaning and the description of what's going on. Have it on a phone on a QR code. Let's not be so worried that kids have their noses in their phone. Let's be worried, are we giving them the right information when their noses are in their phones? And vice versa. Are we, as kids, as youth, are we afraid to ask the questions? Or can we be a little uncomfortable and push for an answer in order for us to move forward? So there's a very different change in how we need to approach people being at the mandir, at the temples, whether doesn't matter if they're 20 or 80 or 50, if they're with kids, without kids, the expectations of the world are changing.